So EEVEE Next has been out for a bit, and in this one I wanted to test it out by using it to make an actual real life render that you would probably make yourself instead of just a demo test file. So everything in this video is going to be done in EEVEE Next, and you'll see how I created this entire scene from scratch as well. And then at the end, I'll share my thoughts on how this performs in a more real life situation. So yeah, let's just get started. And by the way, if you'd want to download this blend file, I'll just leave a link below. It's free. It just comes with everything except the people, because that's from a different pack I bought, but it comes with everything else. Anyways, let's get into the video. Okay, so I'm just starting this one off with some basic modeling. I'm just dropping in a reference image of the kind of area that I want to make. So I think I just went onto Google and typed in Hong Kong alleyway or something like that, and then just dropped that into PureRef, and then that's off to the side, just so I can look at it while I'm modeling. That actually makes it a lot easier to make the kind of shapes that I want to make here. So I'm just going in, looking at that picture, and then going back to my model and trying to roughly recreate the shape of what I'm seeing there. And trust me, this is much easier when you have it right next to your Blender file open, or even if you don't have room on your screen, just tab back and forth. It's much easier to model when you have something to look at. As you can see here, you'll see me zooming into this and recreating certain parts. But anyways, what I'm doing here is I'm just blocking out, starting from like the biggest shapes. So I'm doing just one entire floor, and then moving down to smaller shapes like windows, and then even smaller shapes like window sills and air conditioning units. And like it basically, you start with the bigger details, move it to finer and finer details as you move along with it. But you can see here, everything is pretty simple shapes. The window sills and windows and the whole building itself is just made out of cubes. So it just, if you can look at the reference image and try and practice getting good at like thinking about in your head what shapes you need to add to recreate the thing you're looking at, and how you can keep it as simple as possible. That's basically what I'm doing here. And it's quite a fun technique once you kind of get the hang of it. And it gives you all these little assets to use in the scene. It's pretty nice. So you can see on the left here, I'm zoomed way in onto this random rack over there. And I'm just in the Blender here on the right, recreating this with really, really basic shapes, just cubes that are stretched out into like these kind of rods. Again, it's just literally just, this entire thing is cubes. But yeah, you can see it, if you just keep it simple, keep it fast, don't get caught up in any one model, and just try and recreate roughly what you see in the reference with some basic shapes. This kind of low poly modeling is pretty easy. So you can see like this AC unit is just basically a cube with some random insets and extrusions. And then the texture is just a picture of an actual AC unit. And that's all the detail on that one. And then I'm throwing on like a rusty metal texture onto all these models here. You can see I repeated that process a few more times with some other racks and stuff. And then here I'm just grabbing a texture from Polyhaven. So sometimes I'll use Bridge, sometimes I'll use Polyhaven or textures.com or ambient CG or whatever. But in this one, it's Polyhaven. So if you want to get these textures, you can get them for free from the Polyhaven website. And then just throwing on like a glass material on this. My favorite glass material for Windows has been like metallic all the way up, roughness down, and then alpha just down a little bit. So you can see it's like just basically metallic, with shiny metallic with the alpha turned down a bit. And that's a really easy window shader. And then I'm just throwing that onto all the window areas, and then mixing in some rusty metal on some of the windows here and there. And then the rest of it's like a plaster concrete material from Polyhaven. And then I've actually mixed in some grunge image from textures.com as well into the base color. Now you can see it repeating a ton here, like really badly, obviously repeating upwards as it's arrayed up. So one thing I like to do to counteract that is actually take a color map from a different texture and then mix that in to the color, just with a mix RGB node, mix color node, whatever it's called now. And then the factor for those two things is going to be a noise texture. So it's two color maps and then a noise texture mixes between them. And the reason I'm using a noise texture is because it's a procedural texture, so it's going to be random throughout the entire model, and there's no repetition on the noise texture. It's completely random throughout the whole thing. And that lets you hide the repeating pattern actually pretty easily. So that's one of my favorite techniques for hiding repetition and repeating patterns like this. And you can see it does a pretty decent job. If you look closely, you might be able to tell, but for the most part, it's not too bad at all. And then I'm just taking these racks, these low poly racks I made earlier, and just kind of randomly duplicating it upwards throughout this building front side here. Just trying to make it look somewhat like the reference image again. Then I'm just doing a randomized transform with the rotation just to randomize how they're all angled a little bit. Just to make it feel a bit more run down and a little bit janky and not so, when everything's perfectly straight, it just looks very 3D. You can see there when I turn on the EEVEE Next ray tracing and then the shadows, the world shadows from the HDRI, it actually is looking quite nice here. I was surprised with how good EEVEE Next was looking here. So once I had one building done, I could just duplicate that. I could just duplicate that whole thing multiple times, and just get a bunch of them. And this is kind of the main area that the whole render is based off of, is this thing right here. So this bottom section is just one floor of this building, and that's just going to be reused a bunch of times. And you can't even really tell that it's being reused here if you just angle it a bit differently and just kind of adjust it in a way that's not the exact same. You can actually get away with using the same model probably many times in the scene, many more times than you would think. And you can see we're starting to get somewhere here. I'm just adding in a volume cube here. So I'm just adding a cube, delete the principled shader, add a volume scatter. And that's my volume setup. And then you can see it wasn't quite looking like how I wanted with the HDRI lighting in here. I think EEVEE Next just doesn't look quite as good as Cycles when it comes to volume and how the HDRI interacts with it. But I knew I wanted this to be a dark render anyway, so I wasn't too worried about that right here. And you can see I'm reusing that same model, that same one main floor that I made earlier a bunch of times here. And then I'm blocking out the rest of the scene with just basic cubes, and I'm just throwing on the same texture that's on the buildings onto the wall, and also it'll go on the floor later too. But okay, so I'm adding some extra trim onto this wall here, just really basic modeling, and then adding in a little roof thing here. I'm not really sure what you call this, but like one of these metal roof things. Just doing a bunch of edge loops and then a checker deselect, and then just bevel that, and there you go, a little metal roof thing. Throw on that rusty metal texture, and then combine it with one of those racks from earlier and just kind of rotate it to line up with that. And there you go. And that's why it's kind of nice to have a few models already ready to go, whether you want to model it in the scene or just bring them in from the browser. Just having models ready to work with is really nice to have, because you can just combine it with other things and make new models really quickly. And things like this, things like the AC unit, they're really, really reusable throughout the scene. Especially in an alleyway render, it makes sense there's going to be a lot of AC units. So I don't mind modeling that because I know it's going to be reused so many times. And then what I'm doing here is just adding some edge loops and then blocking out the shape of doorways where I'm going to extrude them in a second. So if I just grab all these little things here that are kind of doorway shaped and then just extrude them inwards, then inset first, then extrude it in. And then I'll put like the metal texture on that door so it looks like an actual door material sort of. And then I'm just taking those outside edges, pulling those out the other way a little bit. And we've got some like pretty, just like very low poly simple, but convincing enough doors. And then I'm just taking that whole wall of stuff I just made there and then duplicating that over to the left side, or to the right side rather. And then we've got this kind of alleyway already set up here. Now the most challenging part I found was actually the lighting here. So you'll see me going back and forth between different lighting setups throughout the whole thing. I don't know if it's just because I'm not used to EEVEE Next, or sometimes I just have trouble lighting the scene, whether it's Cycles or EEVEE, or you just can't seem to get anything good. It just happens sometimes when you're doing art. I don't know what it was, but it was very hard for me to get a good lighting setup in this one. I think it does feel a bit different in EEVEE Next, so it could have been that too. Right here, I'm taking the floor material, which is the same as the wall and buildings. The only thing I'm adding is a noise texture, which is controlling the roughness, and the same noise texture is also controlling the strength of the normal map. So that leaves you with some areas that are really low roughness and low normal map strength. So you get really shiny flat areas, and then in the noise pattern, you'll get some areas that are really rough and bumpy from the normal map. And that's my favorite way to make puddles. Here I'm taking a curve, and this is my favorite way to add like sci-fi kind of wires like this, is you just add a curve, increase the bevel resolution, the bevel depth, and then you can just take that, duplicate that wire a bunch of times over itself, make a bunch of copies of it, make some really thin ones, and then basically just create this little cluster of wires here. I actually have a bunch of these I've already made, but I just decided for the recording to make a new one. But you can see how simple it is. You just take this curve, make it really thin, make it black, and then just duplicate this thing a bunch of times over itself into this little cluster. It does help to look at references here just to get some ideas of how these things should be hanging, but it's pretty easy to make these. And then once you have one or two, you just save it to the asset browser, and then anytime you need sci-fi wires, you just drag and drop it in. So since it's a curve, you just right click it, hit convert to mesh, and then you could just join it together, put a black material on it, and then now you could just duplicate this wire thing as many times as you want throughout the scene. And in an alleyway render like this, you can pretty much get away with duplicating this thing a lot of times, because if you look at any reference images or you go somewhere like this in real life, you'll notice there's just so many. It's very often you'll find like so many different wires and pipes and AC units and just things like that everywhere. Like there's so much to the point where it'd be hard actually to model all of it. So if you want to just go crazy with this stuff and add tons of wires and AC units everywhere, you'll probably actually make it look more realistic than going too far. So here's how it's looking right now. I'm actually pretty impressed with how EEVEE Next is looking here. I really do like this kind of look here, even though I did find it kind of challenging to work with in this one. Looking back, it looks pretty good. And then I'm just duplicating these roof rack things, whatever this metal roof thing is, a bunch of times here, and that just seems to make it look more and more like realistic and lived in. I don't know. Just when in an alleyway like this, you can just basically add all these weird little objects everywhere, and it'll look good. So I'm going into the browser and dropping in some models from Polyhaven. Again, these are all free if you want to download these from their website. I'm doing it from the add-on, so it's automatically put it into the browser. But one of the models that it comes with is this like build your own vent kit thing. So you can see me just taking these vent models and just lining those up together, kind of like a little Lego set thing. And then you can just join that together and then make a little vent thing. And then same thing with pipes, and these are all textured too, so it's really handy to just be able to create a little cluster of whatever you want with these and then just drop it into the scene. So you can see me just, basically treating this like a little Lego thing, combining all these little pipes together, duplicating even more chunks over itself, and it's a really nice way to create some pipes without really having to model yourself that much. And then you can just join that together into one object. And then it's a really handy model to have just to add tons of detail in the scene. And then here, doing the same thing with like a ladder thing. So those pipes are going to go onto the side of the building and the side of the walls and just anywhere where it looks good, really. You could see I already started lighting the inside of the buildings with this kind of emission thing, but I wasn't really happy with that. So what I'm doing here is just adding in point lights. Since the buildings are modeled with windows that are actually like have holes in the windows for like empty space there, I can actually just drop in point lights, and then it looks pretty convincing just having that room lit up from the inside. So that's how I lit the buildings like that. It's just point lights. So I'm just dropping in more models from Polyhaven here. And I'm just basically just dropping in anything that seems like it's kind of related to an alleyway. With a scene like this, it's going to be really dense. So you want to try and fill it up with as much, as many random city street objects as you can. And having a little kit like this or an asset browser that has a bunch of models like this is really, really handy, so you don't have to like model 100 different things. And then another thing I like doing in these alleyways is taking some faces on like the subdivided ground and just bringing them up a little bit with proportional editing, just so that we can create some like bumps in the terrain. You're never going to get a perfectly flat ground in real life, so anything you can do to just offset it a little bit is going to be nice. And you can see me flipping through a bunch of different lighting setups here. I wasn't really happy with any one of them here. I think they could have all worked, but it could have been just the fact that I was staring at the same image for too long and I just wasn't happy with it no matter what, or maybe just, I don't know, didn't feel it at the time. But the final lighting setup I ended up with was, you'll see it in a second. Here I'm just dropping in some people. These are from, I think, CG Trader. It's some random pack I bought a long time ago. It was probably like $50 or something of just a bunch of low poly people. Pretty handy for scenes like this. And yeah, this is what I mean. Like any one of these lighting setups probably could have worked if I'd stuck with it, but the one I got was this one right here. So I just dropped a point light behind this dude here, and that actually looked kind of cool. Reminded me kind of like, looks like car headlights in this alleyway. So I kind of liked that, and then made it a bit warm to kind of match that car headlight vibe. And then there's point lights all throughout the different buildings here in the sides or between them. And then I just made that blue to kind of counteract the orange windows we have and the warm point light there. And this is how I like to approach. So you can see the point lights there, just really basic, just throwing them in between the buildings. But what I was saying is this is how I like to approach colors very often, is have like, if you're going to have two main colors in the scene, I'll try to have one dominant color, like the blue you can see here, and then one color that kind of complements that isn't used as much. So the orange here, it's kind of sporadic and there's not a ton of orange, but it's on the opposite side of the spectrum as blue, and it just complements that blue really nicely. If you have an equal amount of the two colors, it just doesn't look as nice as if you have one dominant one and then one that kind of just complements that a little bit, like the orange is complementing the blue. So that's the render I got. I ended up going back and adjusting the perspective slightly, but it's pretty much what I got here. And then it was quite a dark render, so I ended up having to brighten this up a little bit in Photoshop. But I'm not doing anything too crazy here, just my usual process. Increase the brightness, bring up the shadows maybe a little bit, increase the clarity, add some saturation, sharpening. Film grain was actually really helpful here. I found that film grain just made it look a lot better for some reason. And this is what I got here. So I did end up going back and like just adjusting a couple random little things, but it's nothing that important. Here's the final result. And yeah, I'm actually quite happy with how EEVEE Next looks in this one. I don't think I'd be able to tell if this was EEVEE or Cycles if I was just looking at this for the first time. Maybe I'd guess EEVEE because of couple little lighting glitch little things here and there, but for the most part, this is like, it looks good in my opinion. Okay, so I almost exclusively use Cycles, and I have been for the last few years. And so how does this compare to Cycles? Well, to start with the pros, it's quite fast. So that's really nice. Obviously with this, you would expect it to be fast. So it did deliver there. It was pretty snappy throughout the whole scene. I think it seems faster than the old EEVEE. The old EEVEE, like by the time you'd finish a really complex scene, it would really bog down. This maybe could have just been with this particular one, but it didn't seem to be doing that as much. So that was nice. I could still use it quite easily by the end. The next thing is the ray tracing looks good. Just keep in mind that it's screen space ray tracing. So if the thing that's getting ray traced moves off screen, you're not going to see the ray tracing from it. Just a little bit annoying and kind of a thing to get used to, but it's not really a problem. It's just a bit of a different way of using it. I think I'll get used to it once I just have more experience with it. And for the last thing, I'm guessing you could probably use this exclusively instead of Cycles if you really wanted to, though I still prefer Cycles, and there were a few problems with it, which I'll get into in a second. But if you really wanted to, because your computer is horrible, you could probably use this and get still like good looking results, good looking renders with this alone if you wanted. I'm not going to do that because I like Cycles more, but yeah, it looks good. Okay, so some problems I had with it. First of all, there's a volume, what seemed like a glitch to me. Maybe I'm just doing something wrong, but I was noticing that anytime, like if I had multiple lights in close proximity in the scene, only one of them, or like certain lights just wouldn't show up in the volume scatter at all. They would show up and light up like the reflections in the scene, but they wouldn't affect the volume, which is super annoying in certain situations. Like I was trying to make have two lights next to each other to make like the illusion of like car headlights, and only one of them would show up at a time. It was super annoying, and I just couldn't do it. I ended up having to just let it be glitched and then fix it in Photoshop. So maybe I was just doing something wrong, but no matter what I did, deleting it, re-adding it, duplicating it, and just trying every single setting, I couldn't get it to work. And then there was a couple weird, lighting things, weird little lighting things that happen in EEVEE that still are there. Like, I'll try and zoom in on some of these weird little corners where the light is just behaving a bit weird. Maybe that could have been fixed by adding like more thickness to the walls or changing some setting on the light. So that maybe is just me not using the engine properly. I'm not really sure, but that's still in there. It looks like it just gives you that like video gamey kind of look in some areas. Again, not a big deal, but it's just something that you don't get in cycles. But anyways, that's what I found with this is there's a couple problems mainly with the volume and just a couple little lighting things. But for the most part, yeah, it looks good overall, and I'm excited to see what people do with it. Okay, so that's it for this one. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to download this blend file that I'm showing in this video, you can just get it for free down below. And yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in some other video.